When you're trying to learn how to drive a car with a manual transmission.
Oh, yeah. The absolute worst.
Right. It's so stressful.
Yeah.
And the absolute worst thing someone can do is sit in the passenger seat and just like describe what the car looks like from the outside while it's
Oh,
moving.
exactly. Just giving you these visual cues.
Yeah, they say things like, just accelerate smoothly or make the car glide forward into first gear.
As that helps at all.
I mean, you're sitting there behind the wheel sweating. The engine has stalled for like the fifth consecutive time.
And there's definitely a line of angry cars honking right behind you.
Oh, always. And you're thinking, I understand what it is mathematically supposed to look like,
Yeah.
but what is my left foot actually supposed to feel?
Right. It's just the ultimate disconnect in learning any physical skill.
Yeah, totally.
Because the instructor is describing the visual external result of a successful action, but they are completely ignoring the invisible internal mechanism that you actually need to achieve it.
They just skip right over the physical sensation.
Exactly. They just assume you know what it feels like.
Which you don't. Like no one ever tells you about that tiny millimeter of resistance in the clutch pedal.
The bite point.
Yeah, the bite point. They don't tell you to look for that tiny, almost vibrating tension in your left calf muscle when you hit the exact spot where the gears actually engage.
And until you understand what that bite point feels like inside your own nervous system, you are never going to get that car moving smoothly.
Never. And that massive gap, like that absolute canyon between the visual instructions a coach gives you and the internal physical sensations your body actually needs to feel.
That's exactly what we are deconstructing in today's deep dive.
It really is. And we are going to use a highly specific, high-speed laboratory to explore this whole concept.
Game of badminton.
Yeah, which is crazy when you think about it.
It is. At the elite level, I mean, it's a sport that demands both the explosive power of a sprinter and the, microscopic surgical precision of a watchmaker.
Often within the exact same second, right?
Literally within milliseconds of each other. So what we are examining today is really a masterclass in human biomechanics.
We're going to break down the anatomy of elite mechanics to understand how those abstract coaching cliches translate into concrete physical realities.
Yeah, we'll explore the delicate physics of net play, the surprisingly violent mechanics of the smash.
Oh, that part is wild.
It really is. And we'll get into the microscopic architecture of how the human hand grips an object for, maximum energy transfer.
So the mission for this deep dive is to uncover those hidden physics, the internal sensations of true mastery.
Right, taking those empty, frustrating phrases you hear from coaches and translating them into the actual micro movements of your joints and tendons.
Yeah, muscles, yeah. We want to help you understand not just the geometry of how to move your arm, but the underlying anatomical logic of why moving it in a very specific and often completely counterintuitive way unlocks an entirely different level of performance.
Which is huge.
It is. So we are starting right at the front of the court, right at the net.
Because this happens to be where one of the most universally repeated pieces of coaching advice actually, it destroys a player's mechanics.
It's the classic trap. You walk into any gymnasium or training center, and you will hear a coach shouting some variation of this abstract cliche.
Keep your racket head high.
Yes, keep it high, and the coach shouts it with the best of intentions, obviously.
Of course, but the beginner hears it, and their brain instinctively interprets that command in the most direct, literal way possible.
An anatomically devastating way.
Yeah, completely devastating. They think, the racket head needs to point up to the ceiling.
So to achieve that visual shape, what do?
They bend their wrist backward. They pull the back of their hand toward their forearm just to force the racket head to point up.
Okay, let's actually pause and look at the logic there because I really want to challenge why that's considered a mistake. If the ultimate goal of the player is just to make sure the racket head is up above the level of the net cord, why does it matter which joint they use to get it there?
That's a fair question.
Like if bending the wrist backward gets the racket high, hasn't the job been accomplished? I mean, structurally speaking?
Well, it visually achieves the goal, yes, but it is a biomechanical dead end.
A dead end. Why?
Let's do a quick physical test to prove why. Like if you are listening to this right now, whether you are sitting at a desk or walking the dog, hold your dominant hand out in front of you.
Okay, I'm doing it. Hand is out.
Now pull your hand backward at the wrist as far as it will possibly go.
Like pointing my fingers straight up at the sky.
Exactly. Point them straight up, pulling the back of your hand aggressively toward your forearm. In anatomy, this extreme backward bend is called maximal dorsiflexion.
Okay, my wrist is pulled all the way back.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, it feels incredibly tight.
Exactly. Hold it right there at its absolute limit. Don't let it relax.
Okay, it's locked.
Now, while keeping your wrist locked back in that extreme position, try to quickly and fluidly wiggle your fingers. Or, try to squeeze an imaginary object with precision.
Oh, wow. I literally can't.
Right.
Yeah, my fingers feel like they're made of wood. The tendons in my forearm are completely taut, like guitar strings that are wound way too tight.
That tension is exactly the problem. When you bend a joint to its absolute limit, you consume all the available slack in the surrounding tendons and ligaments.
You just use up all the runway.
Precisely. You are locking the joint structure. And a locked wrist means you have zero flexibility left for your fingers to make any sort of micro adjustments.
You have literally run out of anatomical runway.
Yeah. If you are holding a racket like that, you aren't holding an instrument of precision anymore.
What are you holding?
You are holding a stiff board.
Wow. So because I spent all of my mobility just getting the racket into the upward position, I have no mobility left in reserve to actually strike the shuttlecock with any nuance.
Exactly. And that lack of mobility triggers this massive cascading failure in your entire swing trajectory.
How so?
Well, think about the posture of someone who relies on their wrist for height. Because they're just bending the wrist back, their elbow is usually dropped down low.
Right. Resting somewhere near their ribs.
Yeah. So if the elbow is low and the wrist is cocked backward, consider the physical path that arm has to take to swing forward.
I mean, the arm is fundamentally forced to move from the bottom up.
Exactly. You are effectively lobbing or patting the shuttlecock in an upward scooping motion just to get it over the net cord.
Which creates a very specific flight path.
Yeah.
It creates a high, slow, looping, parabolic arc.
And in badminton, giving your opponent a high, slow, parabolic arc right at the net
Is basically death.
Yeah, it is essentially writing your own resignation letter. It is a sitting duck.
Because the shuttle just hangs in the air.
Right, giving the opponent all the time in the world to step forward and violently smash it straight down into your side of the court.
You have literally handed them the perfect angle of attack simply because your elbow was low.
Simply because you bent your wrist instead of raising your elbow, yeah.
Okay, so if the literal interpretation, just bending the wrist, is a biomechanical trap, we need to understand the true fix.
Right.
And the fundamental mechanical secret here shifts the entire paradigm of how a player approaches the net. The height cannot come from the wrist.
No.
The height must come from raising the elbow.
Exactly. Elevating the elbow, and by extension the entire upper arm, fundamentally restructures your kinetic chain.
Okay, break that down for me.
So when you lift the elbow high, so it's roughly parallel with your shoulder, you are constructing a high, incredibly stable pivot point near the top of the net. You are creating a fulcrum.
Let's visualize that fulcrum.
Yeah.
It is like you are building a heavy construction crane.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, the elbow is the massive, stable steel base of the crane, and you have hoisted that base all the way up to the top floor of a skyscraper.
That is the perfect mental model. And because you have utilized a massive, strong joint, the shoulder, to elevate that elbow base, your wrist no longer has to do the heavy lifting.
It just gets to chill out.
Yeah. The wrist is entirely relieved of its duty to provide height. With the elbow locked in as this high-altitude fulcrum, the wrist is allowed to remain in a totally neutral, relaxed middle position.
It isn't strained backward into that state of maximal dorsiflexion.
Right. Let's do that physical test again, actually.
Okay, listeners, try this again. Put your hand out in front of you.
But this time, keep your wrist totally flat and neutral, right in line with your forearm.
Okay, neutral wrist.
Now wiggle your fingers.
Oh, man. The difference is night and day.
It really is, right?
Yeah, because the wrist is neutral, all the slack in the tendons is restored, my fingers are totally free.
And that means the control of the racket is instantly and magically transferred down the kinetic chain.
Down to where?
To the smallest, most highly innervated, most sensitive muscles in your entire arm, the micro muscles of your forearm and your fingers.
We are talking specifically about the forearm's ability to rotate, right? And those incredibly delicate pinching and rolling motions of the thumb and the index finger.
Exactly. By raising the elbow, we are unlocking the micro muscles. Human anatomy dedicates an enormous amount of neurological real estate to the fingertips.
Much more than the big arm muscles.
Oh, massively more. The sensory perception and fine motor control of your thumb and index finger vastly outstrip the blunt force capabilities of your shoulder or bicep.
So when you initiate a strike from this high elbow neutral wrist posture, your racket is no longer forced to swing from the bottom up,
Right, because the fulcrum is already positioned above the net. Therefore, the racket can swipe on a purely horizontal plane or even slightly downward.
which entirely rewrites the physics of the shot. We transition from a slow, scooping lob to a flat, aggressive skim that barely clears the net cord.
It's a game changer.
But beyond just the physics of the shuttle's flight, there is a massive psychological and strategic advantage to this high elbow posture, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
It creates like a cloak of deception.
Deception is the absolute currency of advanced racket sports. I mean, if your elbow is dropped low, your physical options are severely limited.
Your opponent can read your body language like a large print book.
Exactly. But from a high elbow neutral wrist posture, your opponent is flying completely blind. They cannot predict the geometry of your next move.
Because your wrist is neutral and your fingers are active.
Yeah, you possess the mechanical freedom to execute 3 entirely different shots with the exact same setup.
What are the 3 options?
Well, you can gently squeeze the fingers to drop it softly over the net. Or you can violently snap the forearm to push it flat to the back boundary line. Or you can rotate the wrist to slice it sharply cross-court.
And the crazy thing is, the macro posture looks absolutely identical for all 3 options until the final millisecond of contact.
Yep, the opponent has 0 data to react to.
So to bring this out of the theoretical and into the physical, there is a highly specific mechanical drill to ingrain this posture.
Yes, a very specific way to practice it.
You want to practice holding your arm so that the racket head is physically elevated higher than your wrist. But crucially, your wrist must be physically elevated higher than your elbow.
It creates a distinct descending staircase shape, right? Head, wrist, elbow.
And we must clarify that the elbow itself shouldn't be locked out straight, like a rigid plank of wood.
No, definitely not. It requires a slight bend. It needs to remain elastic.
You want to maintain a tiny reserve of forward movement.
Exactly. When the shuttlecock approaches, you execute a microscopic extension of that already high elbow to reach out and kind of meet the shuttle.
While the sensitive fingers handle the microscopic steering.
Right. It is not a broad swing. It is a precise meeting of 2 objects in space.
Which completely dismantles the first coaching cliche. The secret to an elite straight net shot has nothing to do with a high racket head in isolation.
No, it is entirely about establishing a high elbow, which permits a neutral wrist, which activates the fine motor control of the fingers.
Okay, but let's follow the anatomical logic to its next extreme.
Let's do it.
If establishing a high elbow creates the perfect mechanics for a straight shot, what happens when the tactical situation demands that you completely alter the geometry of the rally?
You mean hitting cross-court?
Yeah. What happens when you need to send the shuttlecock diagonally across the entire net?
Well, we enter the realm of the cross-court net shot, which relies on a mechanical principle that is often described as a total cheat code.
I love a good cheat code.
When we analyze the physics of changing a shuttle's direction so drastically, we are really analyzing the concept of physical space.
Okay, base.
Yeah, hitting cross-court requires the physical room to rotate the forearm, thereby turning the racket face from looking straight ahead to looking sideways across the net.
Okay, so let's go back to our flawed beginner posture. If my elbow is dropped down by my ribs.
If your elbow's dropped, you run into an anatomical roadblock. Try it right now.
Okay.
Pin your elbow to your side and try to rotate your forearm so your palm faces outward.
I mean, I can turn it a little bit, but my arm is literally physically blocked by the structure of my own torso.
And the limitations of your shoulder joint.
Yeah, it just gets stuck.
You simply do not possess the anatomical clearance to rotate the forearm enough to angle the racket face severely to the side.
So if a player with a dropped elbow wants to hit the shuttle sideways, their only option is to recruit larger muscles.
Exactly. They have to wildly swim their entire shoulder and drag their whole arm across the front of their body.
Which introduces massive, uncontrollable variables.
The margin for error on a sweeping shoulder swing is catastrophic. I mean, you are applying gross motor mechanics to a situation that demands millimeter precision.
It's like doing surgery with a chainsaw.
Pretty much. The almost inevitable result is a shot that carries too much lateral momentum and flies wide into the tram lines, completely out of bounds.
But if we return to our core principle and raise the elbow.
By elevating the elbow away from the torso, the forearm is suddenly liberated.
The obstacle is removed.
And you suddenly gain maximum rotational freedom.
Okay, so the mechanics of executing this cross-court shot flawlessly can be broken down into a rigorous three-step methodology.
Right. Step one is entirely about posture and deception.
So let's assume the player's right-handed. You step into the shot with your right leg. Your right arm is extended forward and slightly out to your right side.
And most importantly, the elbow is high.
Right. The critical element of step one is that your entire body must present a visual profile that is indistinguishable from the straight net shot we just mastered.
Yes, your shoulder and your upper arm become a totally fixed, immovable anchor.
The upper arm does not track left or right. It stays rigidly pointing forward.
This freezes the opponent's anticipation. They think you're going straight. Then we initiate step two, the directional change.
And this happens incredibly fast, right?
In a fraction of a second, yeah. In the final millisecond before the racket strings meet the shuttle.
So the anchor remains still, but the forearm moves.
Precisely. You execute a sharp outward rotation of the forearm. In biomechanical terms, this movement is called supination.
Supination. For anyone trying to visualize this, it is the exact same anatomical motion you use when you reach out and turn a spherical doorknob outward to open a door.
The doorknob rotation is the absolute perfect parallel. As you supinate the forearm outward, you simultaneously open the wrist just a fraction of a degree.
So turning the doorknob and opening the wrist slightly.
Yeah, and this combined micro-movement instantly angles the flat face of the racket toward the opposite diagonal corner of the court.
But there's a catch,
A
right?
huge catch. There is an absolute prerequisite for this to work. During this rotation, the tension in your fingers gripping the handle must be incredibly, almost dangerously loose.
We are going to explore the profound physics of that loose grip in intricate detail later. But for now, just know the grip must be relaxed to allow the forearm to spin freely.
Exactly. Which brings us to step three, the strike. And when we look at the actual physics of the impact point, we uncover a massive misconception.
Because to hit a successful cross-court shot, you do not actually hit or push the shuttlecock forward.
No, if you introduce forward pushing force, the shuttle will sail long. It goes right out the back. We have to rely on the micromuscles we unlocked earlier.
So how do we strike it?
The strike is generated entirely by the thumb and the index finger. As the forearm supinates, the index finger exerts a microscopic forward pressure on the racket handle, while the thumb simultaneously exerts a microscopic backward pulling pressure.
It's a localized pinching and rolling motion.
Right. You're using the fingers to create leverage.
That finger leverage causes the racket face to rapidly wipe or brush across the shuttlecock on a purely horizontal plane.
You are wiping the side of the shuttle.
Let's be very specific about the geography of the impact, because this is fascinating. If the shuttlecock is a clock face, you are not hitting it dead center on the back of the cork at 6 o'clock.
No, definitely not. You are brushing the back right side of the cork.
So somewhere around like 4 or 5 o'clock.
Exactly. This brushing motion imparts rotational spin and lateral redirection without adding excess forward velocity.
It is a highly delicate operation, which means things frequently go wrong for learners.
Oh, all the time.
So if we analyze the most common failures, we can troubleshoot the underlying mechanical flaws.
Sure.
For instance, a player executes the outward doorknob rotation, they brush the side of the cork, but the shuttlecock pops straight up into the air like a helium balloon.
Right, inviting the opponent to just smash it.
If the trajectory is popping up, what's the root cause?
It's almost always tied to the vertical axis of the contact point. Basically, the player allowed the shuttlecock to drop too close to the floor before making contact.
Okay, so catching it too low.
When the contact point drops below the level of the net cord, the player is mathematically forced to introduce an upward lifting motion to ensure the shuttle clears the obstacle of the net.
Even a slight lift, combined with the cross-court rotation, results in a ballooning trajectory.
Exactly. The theoretical fix is simple, although it demands explosive footwork.
You gotta be fast.
You must arrive at the shuttle earlier in its flight path, catching it at its absolute highest point, so your racket face can remain perfectly horizontal during the brush.
Catch it at the peak of his arc. Okay, let's look at the opposite failure state. The player attempts the cross-court shot, but instead of popping up, the shuttle rockets laterally and lands like a meter wide of the side boundary line.
This failure brings us right back to the broadsword analogy.
Swinging the big muscles.
Yeah, a shot that flies wildly out of bounds indicates the reintroduction of gross motor skills. The player panicked and swung the big muscles of the shoulder and the whole arm.
They stopped brushing and started swinging.
Exactly. And the biomechanical remedy here is ruthless discipline. You must aggressively lock the shoulder joint and the elbow joint in place. You must forbid them from swaying left or right.
The entire philosophy of this shot is based on redirection, not generation.
That's beautifully put. You must allow the incoming momentum of the shuttlecock to do the heavy lifting. You're simply providing an angled surface for it to bounce off of.
It really is a brush, not a strike. And there's a phenomenal visual cue to help gauge if you are applying too much forward force.
Which is?
When you hit a perfect cross-court net shot, the absolute highest peak of the shuttlecock's parabolic arc should occur on your side of the net.
Yes.
By the time the shuttle physically crosses over the white tape of the net cord, it should already be on its downward descent.
It's a great metric. If it is still rising as it crosses the tape, you pushed it. If it is falling as it crosses, you brushed it perfectly.
Analyzing this brushing technique and the concept of relying on the incoming speed of the object brings to mind a very specific analogy. It operates on the exact same physical logic as a matador in a bullfight.
The matador. Okay, let's unpack the physics of that comparison.
So think about the physics of a charging bull. The bull represents massive incoming forward momentum.
Right.
If a matador wanted to stop the bull, he wouldn't stand in front of it, put his hands on its forehead, and attempt to push it backward using his own upper body strength.
That would be suicidal.
Right. The bull possesses infinitely more forward kinetic energy. Instead, the matador executes a casual lateral sidestep, holds out the angled fabric of the cape, and simply redirects the bull's existing momentum.
He brushes the energy into a new trajectory.
Exactly.
That is an exceptionally accurate mechanical analogy. In this scenario, you are the matador of momentum. You are not trying to overpower the shuttle.
You just provide the cape.
You are simply providing the angled cape, the supinated racket face, and allowing the shuttle's own inherent velocity to carry it horizontally along the new path you've dictated.
So we have established a rigid, undeniable biomechanical rule for playing at the front of the court near the net.
Immobilizing the large muscle groups and relying exclusively on the micromuscles of the fingers creates unparalleled surgical precision.
The elbow acts as a dead anchor, and the fingers steer the ship.
Yeah.
But this leads us to a massive physiological contradiction.
Oh, here we go.
We need to transition from the delicate touch at the front of the court to the explosive violence at the back of the court.
Smack.
Right. What happens when you are backed up to the baseline and you actually require the massive power of those big shoulder, chest, and back muscles to generate a devastating smash?
It changes everything.
Why is it that the exact moment a human being attempts to strike an object with maximum muscular force, their neurological system seems to suddenly abandon all capacity for directional control?
You have identified the core biomechanical conflict of backcourt play. We are talking about the inherent friction between two competing objectives,
Which are?
full power delivery versus directional control. It is a physiological dilemma present in almost every fast-paced sport.
Like baseball or golf.
Exactly. When the human brain commands the body to generate 100% maximal force, the nervous system becomes overwhelmed by the sheer effort of muscle recruitment.
Nuance is sacrificed for horsepower.
Precisely. Consequently, when a player winds up to hit as hard as they possibly can, they almost inevitably smash the shuttlecock straight down the dead center of the court.
Often directly into the strings of their opponent's waiting racket.
It is as if the central nervous system has limited processing bandwidth. It can compute the complex physics of maximum velocity, or it can compute the complex geometry of angular targeting.
But it absolutely refuses to compute both simultaneously.
Yes. So if we dissect the mechanics of a failed smash, we can identify 4 distinct compounding root causes that destroy control.
Let's initiate this teardown with root cause number 1.
The late contact point.
Okay, let's break that down.
This is a failure of spatial geometry that forces an anatomical lock. Envision a scenario where the opponent hits a high clear, sending the shuttlecock deep into your backcourt.
Okay, the shuttle is flying high and deep.
The shuttle is descending rapidly, but your backward footwork has been sluggish. As a result, the shuttlecock is now directly above your skull, or worse, its trajectory has carried it slightly behind your vertical axis.
So the shuttle is behind you, but you still have to propel it forward over the net.
Exactly. To physically make contact with an object that is behind you and drive it forward, your arm must undergo an extreme rearward extension.
You have to strain and stretch your shoulder and arm as far backward as humanly possible just to reach it.
And we are right back to the concept of anatomical runway.
Ah. Because your arm is hyperextended backward, the wrist joint is once again pulled to its absolute limit.
It locks completely. Every tendon is stretched taut. Because all the slack has been eliminated from the system, the racket face is rigidly locked into a neutral, forward-facing position.
You physically lack the joint mobility to rotate the racket face to the left or to the right.
You are locked on a centralized rail.
Wow. So the loss of angle isn't a failure of intention. It is a failure of anatomy dictated by poor positioning.
Exactly. The fix, therefore, isn't about swinging differently. It is purely about spatial management.
You have to move your feet faster to alter the geometry of the intersection.
Footwork dictates your biomechanical options. To maintain the capacity for targeting, the shuttlecock must always remain within a specific spatial buffer in front of your body.
If you are right-handed,
If you are right-handed, the ideal point of intersection is slightly in front of you and slightly aligned with your right shoulder.
why does keeping it in front of you solve the wrist lock?
Because if the shuttle is in front of you, your arm does not have to reach maximum rearward extension to strike it. You retain a crucial degree of slack in the wrist and forearm.
Okay.
And this preserved mobility allows your forearm to execute a violent inward rotation at the absolute last microsecond before impact.
Let's define that inward rotation. Earlier, at the net, we talked about outward rotation supination, like opening a doorknob. This is the opposite.
Correct. The inward rotation of the forearm is called pronation. It is the motion you make when you turn your palm to face the floor or, when you empty a glass of water.
Okay, turning it inward.
By keeping the shuttle in front of you, you preserve the ability to violently pronate the forearm, which allows you to slice or angle the racket face to target the corners of the court.
Which perfectly transitions us to root cause number 2, which is arguably the most universal flaw in amateur sport.
Oh, I know what this is.
It is the phenomenon of the death grip.
The death grip.
Yeah.
It is a fascinating example of psychological anxiety manifesting as physiological paralysis.
Tell me about it.
When a player recognizes the opportunity to hit a smash, their brain floods with adrenaline. They desire maximum destruction.
They want to end the point right there.
Exactly. To prepare for this violent act, their instinct is to secure the weapon. So they tense every muscle in their hand and forearm, gripping the racket handle with bone-crushing force from the very first moment they begin to draw their arm back.
Their hand is clenched like an industrial vice long before they ever start swinging forward.
And that premature tension is catastrophic. When you squeeze the handle with maximal force, you involuntarily contract all the flexor muscles in your forearm.
Right.
You are voluntarily locking down the very mechanisms required for fine motor control. Your agility drops to zero.
The angle of the racket face becomes permanently cemented in whatever orientation it happened to be in when you clenched your fist.
Exactly. Because the forearm is completely stiff with tension, there is zero capacity to execute that inward pronation we just discussed.
No empty glass of water.
None. There is no possibility of a last millisecond adjustment to paint the sidelines. You have traded all of your steering capability for the illusion of stability.
It is the equivalent of climbing into a high-performance race car. And before you even start the engine, you pour superglue all over the steering column, locking it dead center.
That's exactly what it's like.
You might be capable of incredible speed, but you are only ever going straight.
Yep.
Let's move to root cause number 3, which
Okay.
addresses how the arm itself travels through space. This is the error of the big club swing.
This failure mode occurs when a player attempts to generate velocity by relying exclusively on the massive ball and socket joint of the shoulder.
Okay, the shoulder doing all the work.
They lock their elbow and their wrist, keeping the entire arm relatively stiff, and they heave the whole rigid structure forward in one massive sweeping arc.
They're swinging their arm as if they're a caveman swinging a heavy wooden club.
It is a primitive kinetic chain. You can certainly generate a significant amount of blunt, generalized force with a club-like swing,
Right.
but a club is notoriously difficult to aim with precision. You cannot thread a needle with a broadsword, and you cannot reliably hit a 10-centimeter target line with a locked, heaving shoulder.
So if the rigid club is the incorrect mental model for generating power, what mechanical model should we replace it with?
We must replace the club with the physics of a whip.
A whip.
A smash should not be a single heaving push. It must be a sequential cascade of accelerations. In a whip, kinetic energy is generated at the thick, heavy handle.
And it travels sequentially down the length of the cord.
Exactly, multiplying a velocity until it reaches the thin tip, which breaks the sound barrier.
So how do we turn the human arm into a whip?
It requires segmented sequencing. First, the large muscles of the torso and shoulder initiate the movement, pulling the upper arm forward. The upper arm then acts as a lever to rapidly pull the elbow and forearm forward. Then, crucially, as the forearm travels forward, it executes that aggressive inward pronation.
The emptying of the glass of water.
Yes. And concurrently with that pronation, the bottom fingers of the hand, the pinky and the ring finger, suddenly clench the bottom of the handle, acting as a brake.
Wow, so many things happening at once.
It is this final explosive combination of forearm pronation and finger braking that snaps the racket head forward at maximum velocity.
And this is where the targeting comes in.
Right. And here's the secret to targeting.
Right.
The exact degree to which you pronate that forearm in that final millisecond dictates the angle of the shot.
Okay, explain that.
A moderate pronation sends the shuttle rocketing straight down the line. An extreme aggressive pronation snaps the racket face sharply, sending the smash cross-court.
It is a highly complex sequence of localized accelerations, completely unlike the single heave of a club.
Completely.
This brings us to root cause number 4, which moves away from anatomy and delves into the neurology of vision. We are talking about visual misalignment.
This is a brilliant insight because it demonstrates how profoundly our visual processing dictates our biomechanical output.
How so?
If you observe an amateur player preparing to hit a smash, note where their eyes are focused. Almost invariably, they're staring with 100% of their visual concentration directly at the shuttlecock descending through the air.
Which logically makes perfect sense.
Of course it does.
If your objective is to strike a small object moving at high speed, you had better keep your eyes locked on that object.
Tracking the object is obviously necessary for contact, but if your central vision is hyperfixated exclusively on the shuttlecock, a massive processing error occurs in your brain's spatial mapping.
Because you can't see the court.
Right. If you only look up at the shuttle, your brain possesses zero real-time data regarding the layout of the opponent's court below you.
You lose the map.
You lose the map, which means you lose awareness of where the defensive gaps are.
And if your brain doesn't know where the gaps are,
if your brain's targeting system does not have a specific set of coordinates to aim for, the nervous system defaults to the safest, simplest motor pattern available, hitting the object straight forward, dead down the middle.
So how do we hack the visual processing system to maintain contact, but also acquire a target?
The biomechanical fix requires learning to split your visual processing streams.
Split them.
During the explosive vertical jump, in that critical split second before you initiate the forward swing, you must train yourself to use your peripheral vision to scan the court beneath the shuttle.
You must mentally lock on to the opponent's defensive vulnerabilities.
You are looking for the empty spaces. For instance, in a doubles match, you use your peripheral vision to locate the awkward seam where the two opponents' defensive zones overlap.
Or, in singles, you mentally highlight the empty real estate along the sideline.
Exactly. You consciously acquire those coordinates with your peripheral vision, you lock that target into your brain's spatial map, and then you allow your subconscious motor control, specifically the degree of your forearm pronation and the squeeze of your fingers, to automatically calibrate the angle of the racket to hit that specific spot.
To reprogram all of these deeply ingrained errors, the late contact, the death grip, the club swing, the visual fixation there, is a brutally effective training protocol.
Brutal, but necessary.
If you are struggling with the accuracy of your smash, the absolute worst methodology you can employ is to continue practicing your smash at 100% physical effort.
You must temporarily abandon power.
The protocol dictates that you must execute your smashes at exactly 70% of your maximum power.
It is an exercise in ego suppression. You have to trade velocity for calibration.
You drop the power to 70%, and you force yourself to aim exclusively for agonizingly difficult, specific targets.
You do not aim for the open court.
Right. You aim directly for the opponent's right hip or right knee, which biomechanically is the most cramped and difficult location for a right-handed player to defend.
Or you aim for a target zone exactly 30 centimeters inside the side boundary line.
And the strict rule of the protocol is that you are not permitted to increase your power output back to 80% or 90% until your accuracy at 70% is completely flawlessly dialed in.
It is also highly recommended during this phase to practice a slice smash or a half smash.
Deliberately cutting across the shuttle rather than hitting it flat.
Yes, when you slice the shuttle, you are forced to become acutely aware of the exact angle of the racket face as it moves through the air. You transition from bludgeoning the shuttle to carving it.
It forces your neurological system to practice shifting the trajectory of the shot away from the dead center of the court.
Exactly, it rewires the brain.
Okay, let's take a deep breath, because this is the moment where every single biomechanical thread we have unschooled so far weaves together.
The master key.
We have meticulously detailed the delicate horizontal wiping mechanics required at the net. We have analyzed the explosive rotational whipping mechanics required for a baseline smash.
Right.
But beneath all of these varied movements, there is a singular, elusive physical sensation that serves as the foundation for everything.
It really is.
It is the master key that governs the interface between human flesh and carbon fiber. We have to examine the true anatomical reality of what it actually means to have a loose grip.
It is the absolute nucleus of racket sports. If the architecture of your grip is flawed, the entire kinetic chain collapses.
It all falls apart.
And the tragedy is that almost every learner builds a flawed architecture because of a deeply misguided assumption regarding the English definition of the word loose.
I will absolutely confess that I fell victim to this semantic trap.
Most people do.
When an instructor tells me, hold the racket loosely, my brain interprets that as a command to minimize surface area contact. I assume I should lightly pinch the handle, using only the soft, fleshy finger pads of my index, middle, and ring fingers, as if I am holding a delicate porcelain teacup.
It sounds entirely logical based on the linguistic cue of loose, but from a physics perspective, gripping a tool with only your finger pads is a structural catastrophe.
Yeah, catastrophe.
Consider the physics of a lever. A badminton racket is a long lever. When you attempt to secure the base of a long lever using only the squishy pads of your fingers, you are creating a foundation of immense instability.
There is no structural integrity to resist opposing forces.
Exactly. When you swing that lever at high speed and the head of the racket collides with a heavy object, a shuttlecock traveling at perhaps 200 kilometers per hour, that collision generates massive torsional force.
The twisting force.
Yeah, the shuttlecock forces the racket head backward. Because your finger pad grip is structurally weak, the handle of the racket will violently twist and rotate inside your hand upon impact.
And the moment the racket face twists, the angle is compromised.
And you have instantly lost all directional control. The shuttle careens off at a random trajectory.
Furthermore, physics dictates that energy is never lost, only transferred.
Exactly.
If the structural integrity of your grip collapses, the kinetic energy generated by your arm swing is absorbed by the twisting of the handle inside your hand.
Rather than being transferred cleanly through the strings into the shuttlecock.
You suffer a simultaneous catastrophic loss of both power and control.
So, if the delicate finger pad grip is a pervasive myth, what is the biomechanical truth?
What's the real way to do it?
The architectural blueprint for the perfect grip is defined as dynamic three-point support. And breaking down the physics of these 3 points fundamentally changed how I view the human hand.
Okay, point number 1 of the dynamic support is the empty palm.
This is the element that breaks everyone's brain because it feels so completely counterintuitive.
The empty palm.
During the setup and preparation phase of any shot, the central fleshy part of your palm, the absolute middle of your hand, must never make physical contact with the grip of the racket.
I want to make sure the listener really grasps this. The palm is essentially hollowed out.
Yes, the handle of the racket rests against the bony base of your fingers, but the palm itself is arched away, creating a distinct physical void.
A void.
The mental imagery used to teach this is perfect. You must maintain enough empty physical space inside your hand, bridging the gap between the grip and your palm, to comfortably enclose a ping pong ball.
A literal sphere of empty air trapped inside your grip.
Yep.
Okay, point number 2 of the dynamic support architecture, the fulcrum. This mechanism relies exclusively on the index finger and the thumb.
These two digits act as the neurological steering wheel for the entire racket. Your index finger should not be wrapped tightly around the handle like a fist.
How should it sit?
Instead, it should slide slightly higher up the grip, resting on the wider bevel, distinctly separated from your middle finger.
If you look at your hand, it looks exactly as if your index finger is resting lightly on the trigger of a water pistol.
The trigger grip is precisely the right geometry. Concurrently, the pad of your thumb rests flat on the side bevel of the handle, sitting in opposition to the index finger.
They form a pair.
Together, the thumb and the index trigger construct the central pivot point, the fulcrum, around which the mass of the racket balances.
They do not exert squeezing pressure to generate blunt power, right?
Right. They execute microscopic pinching and rolling maneuvers to dictate the exact millimeter angle of the strings.
So we have an empty sphere air in the palm and a highly sensitive trigger finger fulcrum at the top.
Point number 3 involves the remaining digits, the hooks.
This refers to the role of the back three fingers, the middle, ring, and pinky fingers.
Pay close attention to the terminology here. They are defined as hooks, not clamps.
Hooks.
These three fingers do not squeeze the handle. They do not press their finger pads into the grip. Instead, they gently curl around the handle and simply hang or rest against the surface.
Was their function then?
They serve two vital functions. First, they act as a structural base to prevent gravity from pulling the racket out of your hand.
In a second.
Second, as we will explore momentarily, they serve as the crucial braking mechanism during the explosive execution of a high-speed shot.
Synthesizing these three elements, the empty palm, the trigger fulcrum, and the hook fingers, leads us to what is often described as the absolute soul of racket sports.
The soul, yeah.
It requires a profound semantic shift in how you relate to gravity. The revelation is this: you do not actually hold the racket, you allow the racket to hang from your fingers.
The distinction between hanging and holding represents a massive shift in internal physical sensation.
How so?
When your brain tells you to hold an object, it commands your muscles to exert active inward tension to clamp down on the object.
You are actively fighting gravity with muscular contraction, which creates stiffness.
Exactly. But when you shift your mental model to letting the racket hang from the hooks of your curled fingers, you are voluntarily surrendering that muscular tension to the force of gravity.
You are just providing a ledge.
You become a coat hook on a wall. The coat hook does not actively squeeze the fabric of the jacket. It merely provides a rigid structure for gravity to act against.
That's a great way to think about it.
When you surrender that tension in your hand, that relaxation travels all the way up your kinetic chain. Your entire arm, from the shoulder joint through the elbow, down through the wrist, is transformed from a rigid club into a completely fluid, flexible whip.
You have achieved a state of maximum potential kinetic energy.
Precisely.
Okay, I track the logic of fluidity, but here's where my understanding of physics hits a brick wall, and I have to demand an explanation. If my palm is completely empty, and my fingers are just lazily acting as a coat hook, how on earth do I generate that terrifying, booming, cracking sound on a massive baseline smash?
Boom.
Yeah. If I swing my arm at 150 kilometers an hour with a completely loose hand, shouldn't centrifugal force rip the racket out of my grip and launch it into the spectator stands?
It feels like an unsolvable paradox, doesn't it? The secret to generating the most violent, explosive power in the sport actually lies within that pocket of empty space.
The ping-pong ball gap.
The biomechanical answer lies in the physics of the snap, and the snap is entirely dependent on the concept of internal acceleration distance.
Break down the physics of internal acceleration for me.
Let's return to the ping-pong ball of empty air we constructed inside your palm. That void is not merely a relaxation technique. That empty space is a physical, anatomical runway.
A runway inside my hand.
Because your palm is arched away from the handle, the racket grip has actual physical room to travel inside the confines of your hand.
Wait, I need to visualize this. You are saying the handle of the racket physically moved independently within the space of my hand.
Yes, that is the secret mechanism. Let's slow down time and look at the explosive forward swing of a smash.
Okay, slow-mo.
Your shoulder and upper arm are driving forward at incredible velocity, pulling your forearm along. But your hand, attached to the end of that accelerating arm, remains in that state of completely empty, relaxed surrender.
The handle is just hanging there.
Then, in the final thousandth of a second before the strings impact the shuttlecock, your central nervous system fires a massive, synchronized command. You transition from a completely empty palm to a violent, instantaneous, maximal clench of all 5 fingers.
You slam the brakes.
You deploy the ultimate braking mechanism. As your fingers violently curl inward, pulling the racket handle toward your palm, that handle travels across the empty void where the ping pong ball used to be.
The runway.
It accelerates incredibly fast across that tiny distance until it violently collides with the fleshy mound of your palm. That collision inside your hand happens at the exact microsecond of impact with the shuttle.
So my hand is literally slamming into the racket handle at the exact millisecond the racket strings are slamming into the shuttlecock.
Exactly. And this violent, instantaneous breaking of the handle against your palm abruptly halts the forward motion of the base of the lever.
Just like snapping a towel.
Let's look at the physics of a wet towel. If you want to snap a wet towel, you don't just push your arm forward, you whip your arm forward and then violently pull your hand backward to a sudden stop.
Right. The pullback creates the snap.
When you instantly halt the base of a flexible lever, all of that pent-up rotational kinetic energy is violently whipped forward into the tip of the lever.
The sudden deceleration of the handle forces the massive acceleration of the racket head.
That phenomenon is what generates the booming, cracking sound. It is not a push. It is a miniature collision happening inside your palm that acts as a multiplier, transferring all of that rotational energy outward into the shuttlecock.
That fundamentally rewrites how I understand power generation. The power is not born from sustained pushing force. It is born from a sudden, violent deceleration within an empty space.
But this revelation comes with a severe, potentially career-ending safety warning that we absolutely must emphasize.
Executing this violent braking mechanism incorrectly can literally put you in the hospital.
We must be explicitly clear on the biomechanics of safety here. When you execute a heavy, full-power smash, the fleshy, muscular base of your palm must make solid, compressive contact with the racket handle upon impact.
The clench must be absolute and complete. Let's explore the anatomy of why that is mandatory. What happens if a player forgets to close the gap?
If you attempt to strike a shuttlecock with maximal force, but you maintain that empty palm void, if you never allow the palm to slam into the handle and instead try to absorb the violent shockwave of the impact using only the delicate structures of your fingers and thumb, you are bypassing the body's natural shock absorber.
The force has to go somewhere.
And because it bypasses the large, fleshy muscles of the palm and forearm, that massive, violent shockwave travels directly into the smallest, most fragile joints of your fingers.
And the wrist.
And the complex, delicate architecture of small bones and ligaments in your wrist.
Which is a direct ticket to an orthopedic surgeon.
It leads directly to severe injuries. The most common is a tear of the TFCC.
The TFCC.
The triangular fibrocartilage complex, which is the crucial cartilage structure on the pinky side of your wrist. Or you can suffer catastrophic tendon inflammation.
Ouch.
The act of the palm slamming into the handle is not just for power. It is the vital grounding mechanism that safely distributes the violent recoil shockwave into the larger, robust muscles of your forearm.
So the unbreakable rule is full clench on the smash, both to maximize the snap and to guarantee safety.
Always.
But let's contextualize this mechanic against what we learned earlier. Let's return to the front of the court.
Back to the net.
Suppose I am attempting that delicate brushing cross-court net shot, the matador shot. Do I execute the violent clench in that scenario?
Absolutely not. Context dictates the physical state. At the net, you never clench your fist.
So the ping pong ball stays.
The palm remains completely empty, housing that imaginary ping pong ball for the entire duration of the shot, from setup through contact to follow through.
The racket remains in a constant state of surrendered hanging.
You rely exclusively on the delicate manipulation of the index and thumb fulcrum to roll the racket face.
Because if a player panics and clenches at the net,
If you squeeze your fist during a shot requiring millimeter precision, you instantly inject massive, rigid, uncontrollable tension into the racket.
you transform a surgical scalpel back into a blunt club.
The resulting force will launch the shuttle wildly out of bounds. The empty space in your hand serves dual purposes. In the back court, it is the runway for violent acceleration. In the front court, it is the soft cushion for ultimate touch.
Okay, let's pull back the lens and look at the meta-analysis of everything we have discussed today, because we have just spent an hour mapping out deeply specific, invisible anatomical mechanics.
We really have.
The ping pong ball gap, the hanging hook fingers, the elbow fulcrum acting as a crane, the internal braking snap. These sensations fundamentally rewrite how a human being interacts with physical force.
It's completely revolutionary for a learner.
Which raises a massive, deeply frustrating question for anyone trying to learn a sport. Why aren't these specific internal physical sensations the very first lesson taught in every single coaching session, every summer sports camp, or every instructional video on the internet?
It is a profound source of frustration for adult learners. The reason these mechanics are hidden lies in a fascinating psychological phenomenon known as expert blindness,
Expert blindness.
which is inextricably linked to how the human brain encodes implicit knowledge.
Let's unpack the psychology of expert blindness. How does a coach become blind to their own mechanics?
Consider the developmental timeline of a professional badminton coach. They have almost certainly been executing these complex biomechanical movements since they were 6 or 7 years old.
Right, they grew up doing it.
Over decades of repetition, the neurological pathways governing these micro-sensations, the subtle feeling of the racket hanging on the back 3 fingers, the exact timing of dropping the shoulder while elevating the elbow, have become deeply, permanently ingrained.
They're as subconscious and automatic as breathing.
Or, to use a universal example, they are as automatic as using a fork to eat dinner.
That is a perfect parallel. When you sit down to eat a salad, your conscious brain does not calculate the weight of the metal fork.
No, it doesn't.
You don't analyze which specific knuckle is acting as the fulcrum to balance the utensil. Your hand just automatically adopts the dynamic support necessary to move the food to your mouth.
The knowledge has migrated from the conscious, analytical frontal lobe of the brain down into the deep, implicit, automatic storage of muscle memory.
Exactly. And because the expert's brain no longer has to consciously process or construct those micro-sensations to execute the movement, they literally forgets that those micro-sensations exist.
More importantly, they forget that a beginner does have to consciously construct them.
So this neurological amnesia creates a massive dichotomy in how physical skills are taught. It creates a divide between macro-level instruction and micro-level instruction.
Yes. When a highly skilled coach attempts to instruct a struggling beginner, the coach can only teach the elements that their conscious brain still actively registers.
And typically, the only things they consciously monitor are the large, visual, external geometries.
The macro movements.
They teach the gross motor skills that you can capture on video.
Right. They issue commands based entirely on external shapes. Step out further with your lunge, raise your racket head higher, make sure you take a full swing.
These are visual cues.
But they consistently fail to articulate what the player actually needs to feel internally, the micromechanics.
The coach doesn't mention the millimeter gap required in the palm, or distinguish whether the thumb is pushing or pulling, or isolate the exact millisecond the forearm should pronate.
Because they literally cannot remember learning those sensations themselves.
And this psychological disconnect is further exacerbated by the severe limitations of human language when it comes to instructing physical sensation.
Language is a tremendously blunt instrument for teaching biomechanics.
It truly is. Let's revisit our favorite example, the word loose. A coach observes a stiff player and yells, "Hold the racket loosely." To the expert coach, whose body intuitively understands the mechanics, the word loose represents a highly specific, complex physical architecture.
It means engaging a dynamic 3-point support system, maintaining an empty palm, activating the index and thumb fulcrum, and allowing the hooks to hang.
But to a total beginner who lacks that deep implicit knowledge, the English word loose only means one thing: the absence of tightness.
Do not grip it hard.
Right. And if you tell a beginner to hold a heavy stick loosely while they swing their arm at high speed, their literal logical interpretation is to just let their hand go limp.
Which usually results in the stick flying out of their grip.
Loose is an abstract conceptual direction. It is not a physical map.
To bridge that linguistic canyon, the adult learner has to become incredibly analytical. This is why you often see dedicated amateurs utilizing bizarre training aids.
Like heavy squash rackets.
Or specialized smash whip tools that click when swung correctly to generate exaggerated physical feedback. The learner is forced to play the role of an anatomical detective.
They have to reverse engineer the coach's abstract command of loose through trial and error.
Until they accidentally stumble upon the specific, undeniable physics of the hanging fulcrum and the internal snap.
It's as if the learner is forced to translate a poem from English into the rigid mathematics of biomechanics.
That's exactly what it is.
When you look at the journey of someone trying to master these concepts, there is a distinct, almost universal evolution. It's a journey from ignorance to explicit mechanical awareness, and finally to true implicit mastery.
The 4 stages.
Let's trace that path. Because I think anyone who has ever stubbornly tried to master a difficult, frustrating physical skill, whether it's a golf swing, playing the violin, or driving a manual car, will deeply recognize these stages.
We can map it out as the four distinct stages of athletic enlightenment.
Stage 1. Hearing the cliché. You arrive at the court, you are enthusiastic, and the coach bestows the magic words upon you. Just hold the racket loosely and whip your arm.
You nod confidently. You understand the English words. You believe you possess the knowledge.
Stage 2. The phase of failure. You step onto the court to apply your new knowledge. You hold the racket like a fragile flower, exactly as you interpreted loose.
You swing at the incoming shuttlecock and disaster.
The racket violently twists in your hand, the shuttle dribbles pathetically into the net, and you generate zero velocity.
You are engulfed in frustration thinking, I'm doing exactly what the coach said. Why isn't this working?
Which brings us to stage 3, the first revelation. This usually occurs purely by accident during a drill, or perhaps after watching a slow-motion breakdown.
You suddenly realize that loose does not equate to weak.
You discover the architecture of the empty palm. You experience the physical sensation of the racket handle traveling inside your grip, accelerating across that empty space before you violently squeeze the brakes.
Suddenly, you execute one single smash that echoes through the hall like a gunshot.
And that specific auditory and tactile feedback is incredibly intoxicating.
It is undeniable proof to your nervous system that this new internal physical sensation is the correct mechanical pathway.
But there is still one final summit to reach. Stage 4, the ultimate refinement.
This is the plateau where you graduate from simply generating brute force to wielding absolute surgical control.
Yes. In stage 4, your awareness expands beyond just the empty palm for power, and you finally comprehend that true directional mastery resides entirely in the thumb and index finger acting as the steering fulcrum.
You internalize the profound truth that you are not holding the racket at all, you are merely hanging it, acting as a conduit for momentum.
This is the moment of true alignment, where the macroscopic visual instructions you were given on day 1 finally perfectly synchronize with the microscopic internal physical realities of your nervous system.
It is the exact moment you finally feel the vibration of the bite point on the clutch pedal in the manual car.
Yes. You stop worrying about what the car looks like from the sidewalk, you stop repeating the verbal instructions in your head, and you simply feel the machinery of the engine engage with the wheels.
That is the perfect encapsulation. You have successfully navigated the journey from naive, implicit assumption through painful explicit analysis, and you have finally arrived back at a new, infinitely higher level of implicit automatic mastery.
What an incredible journey through the human body. Let's synthesize everything we have uncovered. We have traveled a massive distance today, moving past the macro-level illusions of traditional coaching to expose the microscopic architectural realities of human biomechanics.
We deconstructed the high-speed geometry of the net and proved that the elbow, not the wrist, is the true engine of height and deception.
We analyzed the anatomy of precision, learning that the fingers, acting as a highly sensitive fulcrum, dictate the millimeter angle of the racket face,
allowing a player to borrow and redirect incoming momentum with the casual grace of a matador.
We confronted the paradox of power, discovering that explosive, violent velocity does not originate from a rigid death grip, but from the internal acceleration distance a lever is permitted to travel inside the empty void of a palm,
before being subjected to a violent, sudden deceleration.
And, perhaps most fundamentally, we learned that achieving true mastery over any physical discipline requires us to actively circumvent expert blindness.
We must relentlessly question abstract visual cues and demand to understand the deep internal physical sensations that govern the movement.
And that journey from the visual to the internal leads me directly to the provocative thought I want to leave you with today. We've spent this entire deep dive obsessively analyzing the biomechanics of badminton, but this phenomenon, the canyon between external appearance and internal sensation, applies to virtually every complex human endeavor.
It absolutely does.
Think about a skill you are currently struggling to learn, a plateau you just can't seem to break through. Or perhaps think about a skill you have already mastered, but you watch with frustration as someone else fails to grasp it.
How much of that plateau, your struggle, or theirs, exists simply because the focus is entirely locked on the visual result of the movement rather than the invisible internal physical sensation that actually produces the result?
It is a question that forces you to re-examine your entire approach to learning. What is the invisible mechanical truth that you are currently blind to?
Exactly. What is the equivalent of the hanging grip or the raised elbow fulcrum in your own profession, in your hobbies?
If you are learning to paint with watercolors, are you obsessing over the final shape on the canvas? Or are you paying attention to the specific physical tension in your wrist as the bristles drag across the paper?
If you are learning to write complex code, are you just staring blankly at the syntax errors on the screen, or are you ignoring the underlying architectural logic, the structural fulcrum that makes the entire code base function elegantly?
You have to find your bite point. Look for the hidden internal mechanics governing your own life,
Stop worrying about what the vehicle looks like from the outside.
and start paying deep analytical attention to what the machinery actually feels like vibrating under your hands. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Go out and find your fulcrum.